A pleasure to meet y'all at last, and welcome back to films I should have talked about years ago, and also welcome to a point where there's so much background noise, I don't know how to cope with it. But that's what happens when you have to live in a world where there's a lot of construction happening right now. To try and rebuild civilization, it's probably not going to be very easy, but in the end, it should work out fine. Anyways, let's get on with another new movie that I've seen in theaters. Nope. This is the latest instance of Jordan Peele and his surprisingly radical creativity when it comes to high-end suspense and top-notch horror. It is certainly unlike what we've seen before with films like Us and Get Out. Nope, in fact, stars the likes of Daniel Kaluuya, Keke Palmer, Steven Yeun, Michael Wincott, Barbie Ferreira, and a variety of others. And we know for a fact that we have ourselves quite a unique piece. Because unlike what we've seen with the other horror films that Peele himself has made, it is basically the classic tale of UFOs, enhanced for modernization. Because in light of a lot of recent evidence, it can be extremely hard to try and find a generic or possibly even an actual unidentified flying object hovering above us in the atmosphere. But in this instance, we get ourselves not only just this exact type of conspiracy theory that it's virtually impossible for people to really grasp onto a UFO by simply making one click with the camera, but it also gives us the possibility that aliens themselves are extremely dangerous. Because even physicist Stephen Hawking had once said that it is possible for alien life forms to exist somewhere in the universe. Human contact with them, however, would be extremely dangerous. And what we got right here is something that just blows the top off of every known possibility of how an alien could come down on Earth one day and possibly annihilate us with their weapons and technology, far more superior than our own. We never know until it's too late. Anyways, what this movie does is first, it starts off with a supposed flashback scene. A scene that basically highlights a specific television series, a live television series starring the likes of an ape. Because a movie set is in fact depicted with undeniably horrific carnage. An ape with blood all over his face goes around the set, beating people up, smashing stuff, and eventually finding a young boy underneath a table, scared for his life. But then, of course, we get to the point where the main story is introduced. Now, for the record, that scene right there is in fact going to be very important because later on we get to find out exactly how it connects to the events of today, within the movie, of course. So it basically centers on a man played by Daniel Kaluuya named O.J. Haywood. His sister comes along, and eventually they both go on to a movie set of their own to create a modern depiction of a classic 19th century low frame rate short movie that depicts a man riding on a horse. And they go so far to explain to everybody that it was in fact a person of color who actually rode the horse. These pictures had overlapped with each other and were set to play on a loop. Simply put, this was in fact the first ever picture movie. A slide reel of films with tons of pictures put together made it look like that it was an animated feature. A man riding a horse and a horse trotting along the land. They go so far as to have their own horse, which they got from their own company known as Haywood's Horses. And these two certainly have a bit of a chemistry together that is like what Jordan Peele has had in his other films. And I haven't seen a lot of what Get Out and Us had to offer, but from what I remember, Get Out certainly had itself a nice piece that is alike what we've seen from other such horror films of the mid-2000s. And then there was Get Out's own thing that had spawned. Jordan Peele then made himself another film called Us in 2019. And it's supposedly a doppelganger. Doppelgangers that are in fact dangerous. In this instance though, the classic take of having to take a photo of a UFO in the sky would prove that aliens actually existed. But anyways, the Haywoods would then make their way over to their old ranch out in the middle of California. A Californian desert that is in fact home to a small village. A village that hosts its own carnival, has its own show, which is ran by Steven Yeun himself. They eventually discover that there is something going on. Inside this land that they own, with tons of mountainous terrain, a lot of nice blue sky, complete with thick clouds. Lots of vegetation for the most part, despite it being a desert, of course. And of course, they have their own horses. Simply put, OJ himself has got so much that a lot of people don't necessarily have. Up until the point where he actually lost his own father to supposedly a large collection of metal objects, shrapnel, going deep inside his body, killing him. So, tragic as that is, it goes to show, OJ does not have a whole lot left. His own home, his own land, his own horses are technically being threatened from something looming above. But it's not just anything. He believes that it is some kind of terrifying menace from another world. An unidentified flying object, hiding in the sky, and only prepared to come out at certain times of the night. Because eventually at one point OJ actually goes outside and he notices some very peculiar things going on. Such as a part where his horse actually disappears but then comes back. So he knows something's going on up in the sky. He knows that there is some sort of craft that's hovering above his land. And he is wanting to do everything necessary to ensure that it is captured. Or at the very least, documented. So he could show other people that he's not crazy. And I'd say with the way that they were able to achieve all of this, they did a really extravagant, fine job that only Jordan Peele himself could ever do. That same sort of auteur magic that we get from Peter Jackson with the Lord of the Rings films and King Kong 2005. And then we also cannot forget about how the many films by Ang Lee, the many films by Michael Bay, yeah, if you could even call that magic. It's more like anti-sorcery, if you will. Anyways though, Jordan Peele throws it out of the ballpark really far with this one. Because it all boils down to a nice big epic adventure that details the likes of Daniel Kaluuya as well as Keke Palmer and even a guy out there, Angel Torres. A guy who does in fact run his own technology shop. Very similar in way to Best Buy, what we got up here. Because what happens is that OJ Palmer and his sister, they both head on out to the store and are prepared to buy a bunch of cameras. These cameras are going to be capable of hopefully capturing the craft that is up in the sky inside the clouds. Because at some point it's going to come out and want to cause more havoc to the horses that OJ himself owns. However, a few complications arise. A few things pop up here and there. And eventually, another guy comes up. Steven Yeun himself would make an appearance in this area. This part of the film specifically details a couple things that happens between the many connections that were shared between the characters. In the end, however, this scene basically caps off with the cameras being completely set, tested, and ready for one night of observation. The craft supposedly is spotted hovering above and is willing to do anything necessary to avoid getting caught by the cameras. It goes so far as to attempt to shut him down, like the force of an EMP blast. However, it's only temporarily disabled, and the cameras themselves eventually come back online. But this is where we get one of the first jump scares in the movie. A mantis crawls onto the lens. Just when you thought bugs couldn't get any freakier and more terrifying. When you see this close-up shot of the screen showing the camera itself on the big screen, and the mantis just pops in out of nowhere from above. Like, that's pretty clever, I'd say. Too bad jump scares are sort of getting old by this point. But if I want to go any further on this, I might as well just go ahead and highlight a few other things that happen throughout the rest of the film itself. After some more failed attempts, and even an entire grouping of people vanishing, disappeared, claimed victim to the craft itself, it turns out that this giant UFO is in fact a sentient organism. An organism that can shapeshift and transform into various things in the sky. It also has itself its own final form, which is more prevalent by the end of the film. Of course, what happens with Steven Yeun in this film is just incredibly horrific, terrifying beyond any other belief that you would ever see in your whole life. This craft basically creates a suction similar to what a traction beam would do, and this tractor beam-like action causes everybody inside the small stadium to be sucked up into the air and eaten alive. They're basically trapped up in this giant craft's stomach for hours, up until at one point during the next night that comes by. These hours pass and their suffering is finally over after a huge comes by, crunches them all into pieces, allows all the blood to be sprayed onto OJ's house, and with all the metal objects that it had collected, it spits him out. So that basically explains what happened to OJ's father. So, anyways, it's clear by this point they need a new plan. If they can't simply exploit weaknesses of the alien itself, or by simply trying to capture it via film or photography, then they would need another plan. They organize a new plan by making a phone call to Michael Wincott, who in this film plays an old school videographer. You see, because what happens in this movie is that the alien itself can basically detect electronic signatures. It can detect the likes of lights, record players playing loud music, anything that's metallic, anything that could be heard loudly, anything that could basically be declared electronic. Smartphones, tablets, laptops, anything. Cameras themselves are digital in this movie. So it only made sense to go old school with this one, to try and use a film camera operated by using a crank. Wincott in this film seemingly brings out this idea with a lot of pride and a ton of excitement building up. Just knowing the fact that there's finally a moment where the alien can actually be killed after it's swallowed up so many victims by this point and caused a lot of damage and a lot of horror to their lives. It sure was fine time for them to try it and make a comeback at any point. And the way they accomplish this is by creating a large field, complete with large flailing tube men that you'd see in those car commercials, as the alien apparently is attracted to those too, especially the loud noises that the fans make to make them flail around. They set up a huge field, complete with cameras, and a bit of a covering point so that way Wincott's old school camera can be filming in action, catching the alien on camera and finally clearing up the mess for good. But of course, as time goes on, a guy on a motorcycle comes by, eager to try and find out the mystery behind this mess. And unfortunately, let's just say he fails to do so, and OJ is forced to go after him, to go on his own motorcycle, to take this guy's motorcycle around and start riding around the entire field that they are using for observation. The alien comes down and comes after him, nearly kills him several times, up until the point where he eventually leaps off the pike and then goes into a small barn house, allowing the alien to no longer detect him. Swallowed up the bike, and then of course, the epic conclusion. Keke Palmer goes in after the alien, especially after it tries to kill the likes of Michael Wincott and Angel. While it is successful in practically destroying the evidence that Wincott himself held onto in his hands, Angel barely escapes with his life, tumbling down the mountainside, away from the alien's grasp. Pretty similar to how Rogue One ended with Darth Vader almost catching onto the rebels with the Death Star plans. But they just escape. However, here in Nope, we get the epic conclusion. Keke Palmer herself basically makes her way over to the village that includes its own sort of ginormous camera reel located in a well. And this camera reel inside of a well is actually able to hold onto the position of the alien itself. It basically circles around this little town. Palmer releases a giant balloon directly where the camera is situated, and as soon as the alien grabs a hold onto the balloon, bam! The alien is disintegrated after being blasted with the pixels. So, that alone is incredible to see. Super fantastic. I mean, how does it compare to the other Jordan Peele films? I'm not so sure. One thing's for sure though, what's the future going to be like? Is Jordan Peele going to do even better than this? It's hard to tell, but I could sure tell you. It's got a nice cast, it's got a well-detailed storyline, it's got incredible elements of horror cinematic history at its finest. The incredible suspense, the unbelievable effects, and the astounding scares that the alien itself is able to create for the audiences surely makes this an unforgettable masterpiece. I can't necessarily be sure if it's supposed to be more of a masterpiece than anything else that Peele himself was responsible for, but one thing's for sure, we're probably bound to have another Jordan Peele film someday. Whether we like it or not, it's kind of all up to chance. But who knows exactly what we'll get later on. Until anything does come up, my scoring on Nope 2022 is 8.9 out of 10.1. Basically the same exact score that I gave the Skyscraper yesterday. And so, if you want to see more of that on my channel, then make sure that you like, subscribe, comment, follow me on social media, and stay on the Hollywood side.